There's 3 boys and 1 girl.
It's good, I should be that.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be in
Yeah.
assisted living, but I'm actually in a foster
You
home.
do go on it, right?
Yeah, so
That
I'm the
works
only
good
person.
too sometimes, I think.
Not all of
Yeah,
us, but
when it's a good fit, it can work.
When you need care,
Do you need a
because there's
turkey
more
and
likely
that?
than
Yep.
5 people.
I can only
Yeah.
make the house will
Yeah, I'm the only one
just
there
got this
with the
double.
parallel
Oh,
back thing.
yeah.
But they're smaller.
That,
But,
that would be
And so I
awesome.
can't do one bigger
But I
than
don't-
about 12 pounds in that oven.
You don't
I
like
tried
it.
to
There's
force a little
the
going to them.
doors
It took like 6
that they
hours.
don't separate anything to make sure I
Wasn't
can
that big, it
separate
was
Oh,
only
anything.
I could
16
do
pounds.
that.
So
And it was
the
difficult
biggest
for
side
me
until
because
I sent
Christmas
John up to the,
and
Did you
Easter
go in
and
again?
Easter
Yeah.
holidays are
Okay.
very important
Yes.
to me.
nothing bigger than 12 pounds.
They don't even
That's a big
celebrate
break,
it.
yeah, because
They
it'll
don't
crack
celebrate
and
it.
cook.
I did
Yeah,
it
it's just a holiday.
to create a couple
All right,
years
I think
ago.
I'm gonna get started here, if we're not in the middle of something.
Oh, yeah.
Well, welcome everyone. Nice to see some new faces too. My name is Paul Navarre, and this is kind of intended to be a Bible study, but then we go into some other stuff too. So kind of Bible study plus, if you will. So this is the third, well, I'll show you. We're doing 4 in total, and this is the third. You don't need to have heard the other ones, but they are being recorded, so they are on the website. So you can go back and
Great. Oh, great.
catch the ones that you missed. So I have something listed here as to what we're covering, but there's a lot of room for wiggle here, depending on what people want to talk about and where we're at. I always start with a piece of art, and this one just caught my eye. It wasn't something that I was familiar with. This is The Shepherd David by Elizabeth Jane Gardner. Oh boy, I'm gonna have a hard time. I looked it up how to pronounce it, now I can't remember. Bouguereau. But anyway, this is in the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. There is a art museum in D.C. that is just women artists.
Is that right?
Yep. So this is from 1895, so it's not as old as you might think. You can tell the artist was definitely influenced by much older styles of painting. But this really caught my eye just because it's got a lot going on there.
It does.
You know, we have a very, very young David protecting the lamb, but it's clear that he's just murdered that lion. And in a way, I think there's a lot that kind of is my impression of David. You know, there is this gentle vision of nurturing David, but he was also a really violent, ruthless person all in one. You know, so it's all kind of there. But anyway, I quite like that piece. So last time, well, the first time we just kind of talked a little bit about who David is and tried to look a little bit about, well, what do we know about David from outside the Bible? And the answer is not much. There's not a lot of architecture, archaeological, references to David outside of the Bible. So most of what we know is from the Bible. And a lot of what we think we know was written long after David lived. So I don't say that to shake anyone's faith or anything like that, but I think it is useful to kind of take a look at the big picture and just say, why is our impression of David the way it is? So you can get more about that if you go back and listen to the first video. And so we kind of went through him as a young boy. Then last time we kind of talked about David, especially David and Goliath. That was a big piece. And today we'll get to where he is king and a few of the things that happened when David was king. Anybody have any questions from last time for the folks who are here, or any other things before we get rolling here?
We were talking about somebody else. Steve, what was Steve's?
He's done a bunch of them, so I'm not sure.
The last one I went to.
Yeah.
The new Bible.
Oh, right. So yeah, we talked about how we have a new version of the Bible. So the ones that we have in the pew is now slightly outdated. They have updated that, and I use an online site that has the new one. So what we'll be seeing verses from the new version. I have Bibles here if anybody wants one for reference, but everything will be up on the screen.
What's the name of the revised edition that you're doing?
I think it's the NRSV revised or updated.
Revised.
Yeah,
Updated.
updated.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's updated, yeah.
And it's very, very similar. There is really nothing that would make you go, wow, this is not what I thought my religion was. You know, it's not on that level. But one of the details in reference to David that I find really interesting is Goliath has shrunk. So in the version that we have in the pews, well, in the version that we have in the pews, he is 6 cubits tall.
I don't know.
And that would be about 9.5 to 10 feet.
Really tall.
Not too-
And in the revised version, he's 4 cubits, which is more like 6'7", 6'9", something in that range.
That's still tall.
It's still very tall, and it would have been even taller back in the day because people were shorter. And the reason for that change, and the reason for much of the changes in this revised version, is because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls, I don't want to go too much into this because we covered this previously, but the Dead Sea Scrolls basically are an older version in Hebrew of the scriptures than anything we had that existed. Everything we had that was older was a translation. And so there was a real question of, you know, are we getting accurately because we're getting a translation? And so there are a few little things that have changed, and one of them is Goliath's height. And because the Dead Sea Scrolls are older than anything that we had in Hebrew that existed, we tend to believe that that's probably more accurate on those little details. So, what we like to do is just kind of go around the table and read. You don't have to if you don't want to, but are you willing to read a little bit?
Sure.
So we'll just get started here. So David had just slain Goliath, and so this is kind of right after that.
So we'll start with when David.
Yeah, you can just start, with when David, yeah.
When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Interesting.
Yeah,
Saul
really.
took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David and his armor, and even his sword, and his belt, and his bow. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. As a result, Saul set him over the army, and all the people, even the servants of Saul, approved.
Okay, so who is Jonathan? Does anybody know or remember?
Saul's son.
That's right.
Saul's son.
Yep, Saul's son. So, I mean, this is quite striking, just the words they're using in terms of that relationship.
Yeah, really.
It could not be more close. And here's where we really get the first real images of David the general. So he is being placed over the army by Saul, and is successful wherever he goes. And this is a real expansion of the Jewish territory.
That means that he was leader of the army, over the army. I
Yeah.
wondered if there was a two missing there, but it's not.
No. You know, it's funny because we'll some of the stuff we won't get into are battle after battle after battle.
Yeah.
There's a lot of information, and David's role seems to change over time, and it's unclear as to why.
Maybe a little chapter.
Well,
Maybe.
there's definitely some issues with Saul and David not getting along, but there's also this idea of, we have to remember that this wasn't written as a book. It wasn't an author who started with chapter 1 and wrote until they got to the end. They were collected documents. And so I feel like some of these chapters really should stand on their own. And so everybody has a little different perspective. Was he the general with a sword out in front of the army? Or was he the strategist, or was, we get different impressions.
Planning what they're gonna do or something.
Exactly. But certainly the Bible gives David credit for all of the military success that they had. And there's clearly good reason for that, at least according to the Bible. Would you keep reading, please, for me?
Oh,
Yep.
as they were coming home, when David returned from killing the Philistine, is that Goliath?
Exactly,
Not
yeah.
Philistine, this sounds like it was a single person.
Yeah, you're right, that's Goliath that they're
Okay.
talking about.
The women came out of the towns of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul. King Saul. Okay, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they made merry. Want me to finish?
Sure, keep going, yeah.
Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. Oh, that's what they were singing. Saul was very angry, for this saying displeased him. He said, "They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom?" So Saul eyed David from that day on, because I had the impression that Saul really liked David if his son was given the soul, was in the soul of David.
Absolutely, this is where it gets a little confusing, and
Then comes jealousy.
Yeah.
this is 1 through 5, verses 1 through 5. This is verses 6 through 9, and it's kind of like a record scratch. Wait a second, it doesn't flow quite right through there. So again, are these different documents that were kind of put together, or, but back here, it is kind of doing this projection of the future in terms of David would go out and lead the army and do all these things. But here, we're still right after Goliath, so we're not talking about him going out and leading the armies again. We're talking about, so Saul's the king. Of course, he's going to get credit at that point for but the people are starting to say it wasn't Saul who went out there and killed Goliath. It was David. And then David is doing these other things too, so he's, getting the credit for killing the 10,000s of their enemies, while Saul only killed the thousands.
See, in my devious mind,
Mm,
I can't help but think, you put someone in charge of the army, and if they choose to take over anything, they have all the weight of the military behind them, and you've got nothing.
Yeah.
So, anytime I hear that,
you're thinking coup.
I am absolutely thinking coup. And then you look at Jonathan, and you're thinking, well, here's the son of Saul, and here's the army, and there's Saul standing out there by himself being pissed off.
Right.
So,
We'll keep on going, and we skip a lot of stuff, and so it's hard to get the nuance, of all of it. But the Bible does make it really clear that that was not David. He was not trying to do a coup.
yeah, I know.
But again, that's the position of the Bible, not necessarily.
The position of Saul.
And
Well-
Saul gave him that position, right?
He did.
Jonathan instigated it though. If Saul loved his son Jonathan, and Jonathan is the one who lauded David and gave him his armor and his weapons.
Oh, Jonathan did?
Yeah, not Saul.
But it was Saul, according to the Bible, that put him in, who approved it. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
But Jonathan is the one who made that decision and who.
Oh, wow.
But with
It
David,
would have caused dissension if Saul had suddenly said, no, you can't do that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's cast out the hero, and that would turn people against him too. So.
Right. I would say it's a little muddled as to what everybody was thinking. What we definitely have here, though, is the first true indication that Saul is going, this could be trouble. But whether that happened before or not,
Timelines and parables
And people.
lessons and.
Well, David was just there to bring his brothers food, wasn't he? He just happened upon the encampment. Well, he didn't happen, but he was sitting by his dad. Come take food to Saul and to your brothers.
correct.
And,
That's,
oh, this guy's scaring everybody. I'm going to have to stand up to him, Goliath.
that's correct. Although it he was called an armor bearer before Goliath happened. So it's all a little confusing. Now again, that armor bearer reference may have been projecting to the future, that he would be someday in the future. But there again, there's not a lot of story of him doing the job of an armor bearer. So he was called that, but yet
No evidence.
there's no real evidence.
It's not important.
That's the key part, right? There's a lot of details that are kind of confusing here.
They're here and there.
And
Hard to connect them all.
it's very difficult to connect them all. I grew up in a conservative tradition, and they really bent over backwards to draw this linear line between all of these passages, because the Bible is linear and the Bible cannot be wrong, so they're gonna jump all over the place to create this story.
We're gonna do verbal acrobatics.
Verbal acrobatics, absolutely. And I can't buy it. I think it's much easier to understand that there are a lot of individual stories that kind of got, put together.
Put together, people think different.
This is like a bad biography.
Well, and it is a biography of a sort. We know it was written much later. I mean, that's almost certainly the case. And so you have a lot of things going on. You probably have different stories. You probably have different authors. You probably have people who are writing for a purpose. So you couple all those things together and it doesn't flow. But you can make it flow if you want to, and that's fine. Anything else here? I'll keep going. So,
The next day, an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice.
Oh, wow.
Pretty direct.
so that is very concise, and there's a lot of information there. But again, I don't find that necessarily fits with what we were just talking about. Is a general sitting down and playing a lyre in front of the king all the time? It could happen, I suppose.
Well, he
But
was brought there to play the lyre to soothe Saul with his demons.
that was before Goliath.
Yeah.
Yeah, so now are we going backwards? Are we,
Well, he was the only one whose lyre could soothe Saul, then
Right.
why wouldn't he?
right,
And now he's known to the king, he's in the presence of the king, he's important to the king one way or another, even if it is as a mannequin.
right, right.
Cushion, I should say, sorry.
Yeah, no, so I mean, you can kind of fit the puzzle in a way that works that way, for sure. Remember this too, because we're gonna read something that's very similar to this in a little bit.
Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000, and David marched out and came in leading the army. David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for it was he who marched out and came in leading them.
So, again, this follows right after that. So now all of a sudden he's a general again. So we're kind of bouncing around. But again, this is more reinforcement that David was certainly being perceived by the people as the one who is bringing them success, the military leader for sure.
And also, doesn't it at the time when you had success, you either brought in slaves or you brought in the goods that you reaped from the various lands? So he was coming in and bringing looty.
I've been watching.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, but they did. I mean, it's loot, booty, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, so when he came in, he was bringing riches.
One would think, and I mean, they were surrounded by people who wanted to eliminate them. I mean, that was just the time. And so success could be measured in different ways. It certainly could be measured in, bringing back. But at some point, it was just survival too. So it was some level of that.
But I mean, Was there ever any mention of that when Saul, I mean, like Saul said he had great success, he stood in awe of him. So, yeah, in terms of, winning all the battles, but also enriching the kingdom, enriching him,
Because he had
making
the
him.
sword ready to kill him.
Yeah, there is some mention
Keep your
of
enemies
that.
close.
What's that?
Enemies closer,
Keep your,
Oh.
yeah.
friends close, enemies closer.
Well, when he was playing the lyre.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, there is some mention of that, but again, that's not the main part of the
I
story,
know,
so
I
it
know,
doesn't
it's just-
get a lot of play.
In terms of how the people loved him.
Yeah, yeah. No, they never draw that line, and I think that's intentional, even if what you're saying is true.
Because it
Because-
would distract from the actual message.
Exactly, yeah.
And it says, so Saul removed him from his presence and made him commander of 1,000. I mean, David put the husband of Bathsheba in the army too.
We'll get to that, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's after he's king. He's
I know.
still not king
But
yet.
I'm just saying, it could be a way to get rid of him.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Not necessarily have him be more powerful than he already is.
absolutely,
It just didn't happen that way.
yeah. Well, let's keep going here. So I'm jumping just ahead a little bit here.
Then the commanders of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his fame became very great.
So we're starting to get this idea that the army is dividing. There are those who are loyal to Saul and those who are loyal to David, just because of the way they're wording that. You know. And again, the Bible cannot talk enough about how David's fame is growing. It's just continually saying the same thing with different letters. So skipping ahead just a tiny bit again.
Again there was war, and David went out to fight the Philistines. He launched a heavy attack on them so that they fled before him. Then an evil spirit from the Lord came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand while David was playing music. Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he eluded Saul so that he struck the spear into the wall. David fled and escaped that night.
Sound familiar?
Yeah.
This is just a few chapters later.
It's
So-
all the same piece.
Yeah.
It certainly could have happened again.
Trying to get him.
Well, Saul was nuts.
Well, this is the
That's
thing,
fine.
right. It wouldn't surprise me if this is just a retelling of the same
Yeah,
story,
that's
right?
what
It's
I'm
so similar. And again, I know things were different back then, but one point you're a general leading the forces, and the next point you're entertaining the
David's a
king.
liar.
And the king had already tried to kill you once, and you're doing the same thing again.
Yeah.
But who knows? And again, if that's what we're concentrating on, we kind of missed
So
the
they're
point.
thinking the spear has got David's cloak pinned and David's still alive, or they're thinking it goes through David and kills him,
He doesn't pin him. He tries to pin him, but he doesn't.
tries to kill him.
I think he's expecting that it's gonna go right through his body and pin him to the wall.
They're not just keeping him in place by putting his cloak up there with his arms in his own.
Right.
David moved faster.
But yeah, David is fast.
So the whole aspect of the daughter just doesn't play here?
Which daughter?
Saul's daughter that he wanted David to marry so that the Philistines would hate him so that he would die in battle. And she was the snare.
Yeah, I've skipped that part.
I like that story.
Yeah, there is a lot there. And we could talk about David's wives too. I mean, how many wives did David have?
God knows. Literally.
So most people say the Bible mentions 8
Yeah.
and then makes a reference to concubines.
He liked women.
Yeah.
Duh.
Absolutely, yeah. And there is a ton of intrigue. It's very soap opera-ish
Yeah.
with a lot of that stuff. And I decided not to go down that road, but there's a lot there. And even though, like I say, some of this feels a little disjointed, it's good reading. I do recommend.
There must be a movie on that.
Oh, I'm sure there are a few.
Yeah.
There are definitely a few.
Well, I really like that you called it soap operas, because that explains so much to me.
Yeah.
It's just like it makes, oh, yeah, of course, now I get it.
Well, and there again, was this an accurate, detailed account? Or was this an element of entertainment?
But
You
all
know?
of the other kings, when you look at them, they're not really dwelling on the soap opera aspect.
Correct.
Even when you get to Herod and Salome, you're still not talking about soap opera, you're talking about a very distinct relationship, between John the Baptist,
Right.
Herod, and all that stuff. So this is the only one where you get into the details of actually kind of living this with the person.
One of the things I mentioned on the first day was that David is mentioned over 1,000 times in the Bible.
Wow.
Now, many of those references are to the house of David.
Right.
So they're talking about the lineage.
Yeah.
And part of the point of that, like especially the New Testament, was to kind of establish to the Romans, we're not some fly-by-night cult. We have this very long and prestigious history. And so therefore, we as a people don't deserve to be wiped off the planet. We deserve to be, respected as this long, historic, peoples.
To be assimilated, not annihilated.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And one of the ways they did that was to talk about the lineage of Jesus, to establish that he was essentially royal blood. He was never going to be king on earth, especially after they killed him.
It is a setback.
It is, yeah, exactly. But it helps establish, that idea that this is an empire that has gone on, for centuries and centuries. And so there is a perspective that some historians have that the David story in the Old Testament was the groundwork for setting up this narrative that
It's the king.
that he was the king of an empire, and then, what are the books of the Bible? Well, we get into 1 Kings, 2 Kings, establishing more stories of the kings that, some of David and then the following kings. And then we have Chronicles, which is laying out the family tree in excruciating detail.
Weird.
That's in the King James version, so and so begat, so and so begat, so and so begat.
Every chapter.
But again, one could argue that that's all there primarily to establish the bona fides of of the people who were to come. So anyway, they had to play up David's in order to make all of that work. Yeah.
Well, I have a question on Saul. Was it later that he became Paul? Is this the Saul
No,
that became
different.
Paul? Is a different guy?
So you're talking the New Testament.
Okay. And he became Paul, or he was named Paul after.
Correct. Yeah, that's a
different
completely different
Saul.
guy. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
So-
good to know.
So Saul is the first king of the Hebrews.
Okay.
So very much Old Testament. And he was succeeded, it's a little tricky, but he was succeeded by David eventually. Depending, we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, I'm gonna keep going here. So I forget where we are, there we go.
Saul sent messengers to David's house to keep watch over him, planning to kill him in the morning. David's wife, Michal, told him, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through the window. He fled away and escaped. Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed. She put a net of goat's hair on its head and covered it with the clothes. Then Saul sent messengers to take David, and she said, "He is sick." Then Saul sent the messengers to see David for themselves. He said, "Bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him." When the messengers came in, the idol was in the bed with the covering of goat's hair on its head.
This is a spectacular story, right? Do you know the Escape from Alcatraz? Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, I've heard my name.
So Alcatraz prison is an island outside of San Francisco, and there was never a truly successful escape where we know that people got off the island and people saw them.
Escape.
But there was an escape. And the escape, basically people collected like raincoats and built, somehow with some sort of adhesive, built inflatable boats out of them.
Oh,
And snuck off the island. It wasn't that hard to get to the water because nobody thought anybody would be stupid enough to try to leave the island. And so they did leave the island. And the reason I mention it is because they did the same ruse. They built dummies in bed to buy them extra time so that a guard going by would say,
oh, he's still there.
he's still there. And that's exactly what's happening here, is this was a way to buy extra time.
Was it really?
And it makes you wonder if, and I've seen this kind of thing in Hollywood too, on movies. There's so many of those kind of tropes that started in the Bible. Whoever wrote this particular story, had the idea first, and maybe it happened that way. But anyway, I think that's just tremendous. I'm gonna go to the next one here.
When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and went to look for David and his men in the direction of the rocks of the wild goats. He came to the sheepfolds beside the road, where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. The men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do it to him as it seems good to you." Then David went out and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. Afterward, David was stricken to the heart because he had cut off the corner of Saul's cloak. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's appointed, to raise my hand against him, for he is the Lord's anointed." So David rebuked his men severely and did not permit them to attack Saul. Then Saul got up and left the cave and went on his way.
So I've been skipping a lot here, but there's a lot of stories of Saul wanting to kill David, David fleeing, adventures happen. Jonathan helps them reconcile. Saul pledges, I've sinned against you, all these things. And then the same thing happens again where Saul sends out an army to try to kill David. It's just over and over and over again.
Always sounded to me like King Henry VIII.
Exactly.
The longer he was in the king, the more paranoid he got, and the more he knew he couldn't trust anyone, and so he started killing people that he was afraid of.
Well, and another explanation is mental illness. I mean, I think there is some evidence, and they're not exclusive.
Yeah.
I think there is some evidence of, I'm not an expert, but bipolar or something along those lines, because he really does go from, what appears to be very genuine sorrow for his actions to snapping and absolute uncontrollable rage. But again, I think this is another spectacular story where he's so close that David can sneak up on him and take off a little piece.
Yeah, without
Just
waking
can't
him or
help but
something.
think the guy's peeing and you climb up behind him and cut his clothes.
Yeah.
That's pretty stealthy.
Then you kind of look at, well, why is it coming out this way? And, it's very clear that it's important to establish that David was not, what's the word? URSURPER, usurper?
Yeah.
Someone,
Usurper.
usurper,
He
thank
was
you.
not trying to usurp Saul's kingdom.
Correct.
King's son.
And he felt so bad about cutting off the corner of his garment instead of feeling so proud that I could have killed him and I didn't.
Exactly, there is no celebration, there is no, there is no evidence that he did it to humiliate him.
Were all the leaders, though, before this, they were kind of supposed to be anointed by God also, though, weren't they? I mean, the priest said, you know, this is the man who's going to lead us, he is our chosen one for the moment, you know.
Well, David references that Saul is the anointed.
Well, that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying,
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, so he would be going against the Lord, right?
Correct, correct.
The Lord's will was to put Saul in that place, and the Lord would remove him if he was supposed to be removed.
Absolutely right, yeah. And so I kind of read this as the story going like way out of its way to make that exact point. That he had the opportunity
Oh,
and he had the support of the people.
His
So-
is way early.
Well, correct, but they're really talking about people both in Judah and in Israel, which
Well,
was,
I'm
Yeah,
not
who
going to
loved him
because
and all of
he
that.
said he'd be back about 12. I want to wait till 12.
Okay.
Myself, you can go if you want to.
Are you waiting for a wheelchair ride? 'Cause
No,
that
no,
looks like a
Laura
lift
Park's
van.
bus just drove around and we were told by the driver that he would be here till about 12.
oh, do we need to send out a messenger or anything? We're good?
He'll have to wait a minute.
That's
Or we
good.
can call Laurel Park that I had to the other day. But
Hmm.
even got me an hour and a half
He's
later.
parked out at the front door.
Who's in the door?
Put on these earrings, you can wait.
So here's just an example of kind of this reconciliation again, you know, that again we see constantly. So go ahead if you would, Carol.
When David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. Today you have explained how you have dealt well with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For who has ever found an enemy and sent the enemy safely away? So may the Lord reward you with the good for what you have done to me this day. Now I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not wipe out my name from my father's house." So David swore this to Saul. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. That sounds a little dicey.
Yeah, no, so I mean, you know, this is one of the examples of this reconciliation with Saul. It sure seems genuine, doesn't it?
It does, but
But then the end is kind of the giveaway. You know, it's not that David went back to the palace and everything was hunky-dory. In spite of everything, as Saul said, David went his own way, yeah.
The thing that I'm looking at though is that Saul's saying, I mean, he's actually bringing it up, they're making a point of it, don't annihilate my bloodline
Mm,
after you kill me or after I die.
right, right.
Which implies that he would do that to David if he truly believed that David
Right.
was a threat.
Right,
So,
right.
I mean, to make that point, that's a pretty specific point.
There's definitely, you know, a sense of realism here from Saul's perspective that he doesn't seem to have in other places. That he knows David will be king at some point,
Yeah, you will surely be king and the king will be established in your hand.
but he also knows that it could be David who is the one who ends his reign.
Why doesn't, because I really don't recall Jonathan being that important through all of this. So why doesn't Saul think his son will be king?
I mean, I think this is he does feel that way until here, I think. I mean, honestly, I'm not sure he's thinking about it all that much, because he's king, and, you know, this is
And he will
my,
live forever.
exactly, exactly.
Well, did Saul want David to marry his daughter to keep the line going?
Well, he wanted Saul to marry his daughter for various devious reasons. And as a matter of fact, he engaged David to one of his daughters and then married her off to somebody else. So there's a lot
oh,
of
wow.
trickery and intrigue going on. Like I say, it's a soap opera, and
Why is it?
we don't have time to read it, or we'd basically be through, you know, a very tiny portion of his life.
Maybe you should have called this Housewives of Judea.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yes. It's definitely a modern tragedy. But you know, this isn't the first time where I think it really sinks into him that what he's heard God's will is actually God's will, and that's going to come true. So now he's starting to think of his legacy, you know, and
Because what's gonna happen to Jonathan if he loves his son? What is he going to do to protect him, or is he?
good question. We'll get to what happens in a minute here. So let me just see where I am here. Okay, this is a real short one here.
Joanne.
Where was it? Joanne? Yeah, sorry. Can you read that?
Oh, now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. They buried him at his home in Ramah.
Ramah, yeah.
Then David got up and went down to the wilderness of Haran.
So this is just anecdotal. Samuel was still alive for all this. So Samuel was the last judge, and he kind of had a cooperative agreement with Saul where they both kind of ruled different aspects of the kingdom. But eventually Saul just kind of took over the whole show, even though Samuel was still alive. But now he's dead.
Because wasn't Samuel kind of legitimizing Saul?
Very
by
much.
Providing the justice aspect.
Very much so. Yep, that's exactly right. You know, but Samuel was still, you know, hugely respected by the people. So it was a massive event when he died. And so I read this as, you know, David went to pay his respects to what was going on there. But again, there's that little note of, as soon as he could, he got out of Dodge. He was not going to stick around to see what Saul would do.
Haran is?
I do not.
Or how-
I have not looked that up. Again, I don't want to get too far off the track, but there are stories of David like living in other kingdoms with essentially the enemies of the people and becoming trusted, and very complicated intrigue relationships. But the Bible always kind of makes it clear that he was never an enemy of Israel or Judah, even though he had army with his enemies. It's all very complicated and intriguing. It would take a long time to unpack it all.
So David kept Saul's name in the forefront too, so that he was still popular name and person.
Well, I mean, he
Sounded
was
in the
living
last-
with some
not this
kings.
passage, but the last one.
David was in the land of some kings who were actively fighting Saul.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, one interpretation is he was actively aiding and abetting them.
Then
But the Bible tries to write, you know, do this line where
Saul had
he
asked
never had
David.
given up,
yeah.
you know. But it was clear that David was worried for his life, you know, and that there was a division here, you know. Okay, can we read the next part?
Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him, and buried him in Ramah, his own city. Saul had expelled the mediums and the wizards from the land. The Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem. Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. When Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, not by dreams or by Urim or the prophets. Then Saul said to his servants, "Seek for me a woman who is a medium, so that I may go to her and inquire of her." His servants said to him, "There is a medium at Endor."
So have you heard of the witch of Endor?
Yeah.
This is the witch of Endor.
What is Urim? Not by dreams or by Urim?
Urim and Thummim were stones that were supposed to give like messages.
And that was used by Hebrews to talk to God at times, I believe. So that was this is where this starts to get a little bit dicey, because we're gonna go into what the witch does and says, and it's all a little bit uncomfortable.
I never minded that part.
Well, where it becomes uncomfortable is,
It was just, it is what it is.
well, yeah, so, but, I think we've kind of interpreted, the way that Old Testament Hebrews looked at idolatry as being 100% bad. It was talk to God or nothing. That's the only way you could do it. And we start to muddle things a little bit, and we start to get a sense that the Hebrews didn't necessarily see it as clear cut as we would like them to do. And I mean, we do see evidence of that, because as soon as things got bad around Moses' time, they would build an idol and start praying to it. Now, God would be mad about that, but the fact that that was pretty close to their mind meant that this wasn't this radical idea that came out of left field. They were surrounded by it, and certainly some of them at times practiced it, even though, what's that?
Worship both.
Absolutely, both at the same time, right? The more gods, the more likely you are to hit the right one, right?
I remember thinking that when Saul expelled all the wizards and mediums and, anybody into that stuff, and then he says, go find me one.
Yeah.
And her prophecy, I just thought she was kind of like, yeah, you expelled all of us. I'm going to give you the...
Well, let's go to the next part here.
So, is it my turn?
Yeah,
So Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes and went there, he and 2 men with him. They came to the woman by night, and he said, consult a spirit for me and bring up for me the one whom I name to you. The woman said to him, surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the Medians and the wizards from the land. Why then are you laying a snare for my life to bring about my death? But Saul swore to her by the Lord, as the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. Then the woman said, whom shall I bring up for you? He answered, bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You are Saul. The king said to her, have no fear, what do you see? The woman said to Saul, I see a divine being coming up out of the ground. He said to her, what is his appearance? She said, an old man is coming up. He is wrapped in a robe. So Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did obeisance.
I love that. What does he look like? An old man in a robe. Oh, that's Saul. Who else could it be? No, but
Samuel.
or Samuel. Sorry, what did I
That's
say?
all right.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I had to relook at the scripture.
No, thank you. But yeah, so this is what you were talking about. She was terrified because some guy is like saying, do your witchery stuff, make this happen for me. And she's like, this has got to be a trap. Somebody's trying to out me as a sorceress or whatever. So very, very hesitant to go here.
Are these the mediums and the wizards from the land? Are they talking really about worshippers of Ishtar and moving into that?
Very unclear.
At the time, Ishtar was still very strong.
Absolutely. No, I mean, it's very unclear, but it's not unlikely that that's the case.
Okay, thank you.
But I mean, you do have to kind of wonder about the whole story, because basically what she does works. And that kind of goes against everything we're told all the time, right? That if you hold the seance, well, you're just wasting your time, it's all a big joke, right? But it's working here. And I think I've got one more we'll just do. So let's do one more.
Isn't that the one we just read?
Nope.
Oh, no. Start out. Then Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul answered, I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. So I have summoned you to tell me what I should do. Samuel said, Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you just as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you today. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines.
Yeah, so pretty dire.
Who's Amalek?
That's a place, I believe, like a,
Why was God so pissed off about Amalek as opposed to any of the other infidels?
I mean, you know, the whole chapters, again, we skipped through a lot of stuff, is basically God telling David or God telling someone who tells Saul, go attack these people.
Okay.
And as long as they did what God said, they would have success. And so this is a time where the kingdom is generally widening, but every once in a while they would say, go attack Amalek, and Saul wouldn't, and then bad things would happen. And then the kingdom would shrink a little bit, you know.
Okay.
So there was a lot of that going on. And, you know, these kinds of things are funny because, you know, it could be this laundry list of all the things that Saul didn't do, but they're just mentioning this one for whatever reason. But like I say, the thing I just can't get over here is that apparently this seance worked. That's Samuel, and everybody agrees that that's Samuel, and Samuel has this message. Why did you bring me back? You know. So, you know, it really is an interesting story of, you know, do you want to take this literally? You know, I don't have a big problem with that if you do, but you're basically saying then that the rules were different at that time than they are today.
Angels showed up to people,
Absolutely.
and the Lord himself, Jesus, rose from the dead and hung out as a ghost for 3 days.
Correct.
I mean,
So it's certainly plausible. You know, but this is a case that's a little different from that though, because this is going to, through someone who is not part of the tribe,
who's not a believer.
who is not a believer, and having them bring up someone unwillingly. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I just think it's a fascinating story, and I don't have a whole ton of answers of how you should think about it, but I think it's worth thinking about. It's really interesting, and then of course we end on a pretty dark note here, and it won't take long. I think I'm going to stop it there because I don't like to keep you on, but so for the last time, things will move very quickly. David will be king. We'll talk just a little bit about David being king, and then we'll kind of wrap things up then. So any questions or thoughts or?
So with Samuel, do you think it says, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up from,
The dead.
yeah, but was he in heaven at that time?
Oh, I see.
Or was he in the other place?
Well, I mean, that brings up a whole nother thing, which is that the people of that day wouldn't have had a concept of heaven.
Oh, yeah, because Jesus was there.
That's right. And so you don't get any references in the Old Testament about heaven like we perceive it, you know. We do have holy men who died being on the side of God, you know, which is a form of heaven, I guess.
I guess so.
Yeah, you
They
know,
would probably get there sometime or other in the future, and not then.
if you follow that train of thought, yeah.
Maybe this is where the whole concept of purgatory came from.
Oh.
Samuel was sitting down there waiting.
Waiting in that,
Till his task was over,
it could,
which was to be called up to
Could be.
tell Saul some bad news.
I'd never thought of it, but that's probably about the closest you get to purgatory in the Bible, you know, yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Very good.
Paul, that
Thank
was
you.
very good.
Yes.
Okay.
I appreciate it, and hope you can make it next time, and if not, catch the video.
Okay, well,